turning point, because I would say that Obey Alliance is probably Halls of Atonement favorite, if anything, because of how they ran it earlier on in the week whenever they were playing versus Goose Club. So I think that this DOS is going to be the pivotal dungeon for these teams.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we've seen an incredibly strong route out of Complexity at this point already, Nagura, so we already know what they're capable of in this dungeon, but we haven't quite seen what Obey Alliance is going to have in store. So let's get into it. Game number 1 between Complexity and Obey Alliance gets started here in the other side.
All right, so right at the get-go, we do see a mirror comp here between Complexity and Obey Alliance, running this half physical, half magic damage comp with the Vengeance Demon Hunter and the Frost Mage, and then the physical damage coming from the Rogue and the Windwalker, and both of them looking to go to the left side.
Yeah, this is not too surprising of a revelation. We talked a little bit about Obey Alliance kind of playing more comfort picks in the early matches of this tournament. They were running that in Holy DK, for example, and Halls of Atonement, which might not be as fast as the typical comp. However, the other side was a time trial dungeon, and these teams did have plenty of time to practice whatever the best comp turned out to be. In our time trials, it turned out to be pretty much this exact comp, having your focus single target damage coming out of that Rogue and the Frost Mage, and then your Windwalker is there just to blast AoE. And check out the damage meters over on the side of Obey Alliance. 40 might have gotten some Dance of Chi-Ji procs there. Just doing 80k DPS on the pad.
I mean, you can only get that many procs if you have this transmog. I mean, look at 40. Just got a little bit distracted looking at it as they now both move into that Ardent Wheel area. And yeah, Obey Alliance, 40 just absolutely carrying that pool, and that means they're going to be reaching this next Ardent Wheel pool slightly earlier, but it's really only like a 2 seconds difference, as they both seem to be gathering up the same amount of mobs approximately on top of Baruth here, that Tormentor. So keep in mind there's going to be a 50% healing reduction aura on the whole group while they're fighting this pack.
Yep, can be scary, but of course I believe they do have that Ashen Wings running on both sides here, so that passive healing should be enough to, free up any mistakes that they make, and of course also lets the Paladin just pump a bunch of damage too, for both teams doing more overall than their respective rogues. Of course, we know that the rogues aren't really doing as much overall, not really hitting that black powder at all, just going for all of the eviscerates into the focused targets, making sure execution of Earth dies as quickly as possible. That way, whenever those bursting stacks start coming in, they don't have to worry about taking reduced healing while they have those stacks on them.
And it looks like Complexity doing a much better job dealing with this pack, as they pulled it slightly later, but seemed to be done earlier, as Obey Alliance having some issues cleaning up the rest of the mobs that were still left alive after Baruth was going down. You can see it's both 15% trash on the board, so the pool was the same size. Complexity just managed to deal with it a little bit quicker, as they now picked up their anima power and they're moving on to the second pool, still not looking to use the urn just yet.
Yeah, not quite using it. I wonder, they're probably going to end up saving it for the dragon pull, if I had to guess. It's a little bit more of a dangerous pull, especially since you have a lot of kiting that you want to do as a tank, but you can't because of the nature of those Spriggan mobs. Whenever the tank gets out of range of them, they can just one-shot your healer with that. I believe it's Purifying Mist, I think it's called. I can't remember the exact name of the spell, but everyone's seen it once in a while and thinks it's this weird anomaly where your healer just gets one-shot by a bunch of these green strands coming from the mobs. But nope, that's a mechanic. Your tank has to stay within 20 yards of them, otherwise your healer's just going to get destroyed. And here we go. You can see they have that Patrol of Bladebeak CC'd up. They're going to start gathering everything together, believe the Rogue was trixing them to the tank, and now they have everything stacked on top of the urn with that Dragon Mob, and that urn explosion's going to come out here from the Mage, the only Knight fan in the group. And yeah, you get some big AoE here.
Yeah, so you can see Scott just having some issues as he's gathering up the dragon as well with everything else. And Obey Alliance also having to use that ice block on their mage, and everyone just dropping incredibly low. You can see the ocular gland debuff on both the rogue and the mage, because they're not being able to get healed out of that 50% HP range. Did now manage to recover as they're about to gather the next pull as well. I do believe they're going to be using their urn on their side too. But yeah, just a little bit of a different pull size as well. Their first pull that they just did was slightly bigger than what Complexity did before. But Complexity is now doing a bigger pull into their urn. As you can see, they already had used it. Now just trying to kite out the rest of those mobs, plus that dragon as well that they want to deal with.
Yeah, it looked like what went wrong for Complexity at the very start of this poll that they're doing right now is a Storming Tornado had spawned near the urn, which caused Fired Up to have to cancel his first open cast on the urn. And because of that, Scott was taking more damage than they thought to, had to kite it around, didn't quite get the right setup, so looks like the pull is taking them a lot longer than you would expect to. I mean, look at Obey Alliance here. They're actually kind of trucking this pull down, and you can see that once that dragon's down, they don't really have that much left to deal with, so even though they started this pull something like 30 seconds later than Complexity, just because of the mishaps they had at the start of this pull, Obey Alliance is going to be able to catch up to Complexity here.
Yeah, and we see a pot actually, and the cheap death being popped here for Obey Alliance, Rogue and Mage respectively. So no more cheap deaths available for either of those two players. So they have to be a little bit more careful from now on. And I did quickly check the MDI companion. You can check it out yourself as well. It's at mdi.gcd.tv. And I've seen them pick up different kinds of anima powers. So Complexity actually picked up the Dagger of Necrotic Wounding that basically just stacks up that damage effect, that dot. And then we see Obey Alliance, on the other hand, picking up the Volcanic Plume. So 3 of their DPS players picking that up, while Complexity just shows a different one. So interesting difference here in what kind of anima powers these players prefer.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting observation. I didn't even think of taking Necrotic in most of these situations, but I guess, like, really, your AoE damage in this comp is just hoping that your Windwalker Monk gets Chi-Ji procs or just passively cleaving them down. So I guess just making sure you're going for as much focused single target boss damage as possible is going to be the best play in the long run. That's why they're taking that Necrotic Wound, because it is the best single target option. Like in single target scenarios, it can do like 10% of your damage or higher, depending on the class you're playing. So that makes a ton of sense. Let's see how it actually works out for them here. If they're able to actually deal with Exa significantly faster than Obey Alliance. Obey Alliance is catching up, but that's because their Bloodlust is just now running out. But I really like what's happening for Obey Alliance here. They still have their trash available for that funnel damage from the Frost Mage and the Rogue here. The Windwalker didn't really eat up that much of the damage. So by all means, they should technically be able to pull ahead on the boss here just because they had that focus damage for a little while longer. And look at that, they've caught up and actually just barely maybe surpassed Complexity. I mean, they brought it back to an exact percentage, so that's pretty good on catching up.
Yeah, I agree. That was actually a really good thing. I guess that's the advantage of having the Volcanic Plume, is that it gives the tank a little bit more breathing room whenever they do get knocked in the air. Well, Complexity's tank has to just, face tank all of these mobs. So maybe for Complexity, they had to deal with the trash slightly quicker, while maybe Obey Alliance was able to keep them up a little bit longer because this Plume just constantly kicks them up into the air, the trash mobs, and then Skylark doesn't have to be worried about it too much. And you can see Obey Alliance now finished off the boss already a couple of seconds faster, 5 seconds faster than Complexity did.
I'm actually so intrigued by the Volcanic Plume choice. I wonder if the damage loss of taking that trait over either Champion's Brand or Necrotic Wound is going to end up being a better choice in the long run of the dungeon. I mean, it's really hard to say. Now, I think something that's worth mentioning is I'm pretty sure, looking at the damage meters right now, JB didn't end up using Ashen Hollow and Wings during that pull. That Ori popped it after the AoE was already gone. I want to keep an eye on...
Scott dragged the mobs out again.
Oh, that's true. We could have done that again. Definitely did that yesterday on purpose. We saw that. We saw that grief live on air, caught in 4K. I mean, we're going to have to keep an eye on what JB does here, because his wings are up, which, you know, you have a 50-50 shot that every time his wings are up, that Ashen's also up, because it has double the cooldown. So let's see if he actually has it available for this next pull. If he does, that would make up some of the difference and make more sense as to why Obey Alliance caught up. But if he did end up using it on that boss, then Obey Alliance is actually crushing it right now. They're just outpacing Complexity in this dungeon. But check out this pull that Obey Alliance is doing. They're not going for the pull into the Mana Storm Swing that we see from most teams. They're going to the Hakar Wing, it looks like.
Oh, they're actually pulling an Android Spirit. They're pulling it with the Bone Soldiers and the Raptors as well. Okay, so this is a very interesting pull. And I do believe... Okay, we're gonna have to see what they pull afterwards, but I think I like what Complexity is doing here with the way they deal with this, because they are basically aggroing the Bone Soldiers, but skipping the Warlords, and now the Bone Soldiers slowly come into this pack that they're playing here. So you can see Complexity just fighting these packs here, and the ARF, and now the Bone Soldiers and the Raptors are coming in if you look at your left side. So now they have a triple pull here going on. They have the Bone Soldiers, they have the Dental Drill that they dragged onto the line of sight corner while Lip used his Cloak of Shadows to continue single targeting it. And now they finish it off before the second Haywire, and now they can just AoE everything down together. There's going to be a huge amount of percent they get here, and it's incredibly efficient. While Obey Alliance dealt with the Enraged Spirit and the Raptors, and now they're going into this pull. So it's going to be an extra pull that Obey Alliance had to do, and in return they got the extra percentage from the Enraged Spirit. But I'm not sure if that's a good payoff.
Yeah, no, I don't think that is either. I think you're completely right. I mean, most teams just end up skipping that spirit, right? So that's just, they actually just purely added an extra pull into the dungeon for percentage that teams are going to be able to get from doing a bigger pull later on. And we know from yesterday that Complexity likes doing that entire Hakar Wing pull. That's what they save their second Bloodlust for. So they get a lot of percentage all at once there in a very efficient manner. And of course, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, JB did not have Ashen Hollow available for this particular Arfarf pull, so that means that probably very likely used it on that boss before just for pure single target damage, which is a little bit of a feels bad, man, but you know, you got to use it where you have it up, right?
Yeah, and in the end, yeah, he's going to do less DPS on the overall damage meter, right? But the pull is not over until the boss dies, and if it was effective damage on the boss, then it was definitely still very valuable and very effective, as they are dealing with the lubricator now and some of those oils. Looks like Obey Alliance is doing a very similar thing. They're actually dealing with 2 lubricators here and no sentinels, unless they just decide to pull them in after or once they're a little bit lower. But if you look at the percentage right now, of course Complexity ahead a little bit, but I do think the Complexity actually dealt with a little bit more trash in the Ardenweald area, which is interesting because I wonder why Obey Alliance wouldn't do the same percentage there. Because obviously the Ardenweald trash is the most efficient trash you can do in this whole dungeon. So whenever there's some extra trash you can do there, then you should, as long as it makes sense and you can, you know, skip that amount in other areas.
Yeah, that's a bit of a head scratcher, which is kind of, again, even more of a head scratcher because Obey Alliance is, you know, again, playing this dungeon perfectly as we kind of expect them to do. They're very consistent in their execution, but I mean, just from pull routing alone, doesn't even seem like it's better damage, really. Complexity has secured themselves about a quarter of a boss advantage on them, and this is, you know, it's a fortified dungeon, so a quarter of a boss is definitely, you know, possible to catch up from just from better execution later on, but they're kind of running out of dungeon to do that in.
Yeah, I think so as well, especially because Complexity also picked up the more single target focused anima power, while Obey Alliance has this AoE focused anima power, which seemed like it actually was valuable for this Diaxa pull, because they had a lot of trash on top of the boss there. But all the other bosses, you can't actually pull any trash on top, right? We have the Hakar area, where yeah, they can knock up the stance of Hakar, which will make it a little bit easier on the damage, but it's not going to make the boss faster. And then Millhouse and Maleficent, there's no real advantage from having the Volcanic Plume either. And then also you don't get any advantage on the last boss too. So Complexity having that higher damage on that bosses is probably going to matter a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is where Complexity should completely pull ahead because of the Necrotic versus Volcanic choice. Volcanic is, you know, pretty trash on single target, right? So yeah, it looks like they're opening them up the gap. Like when Obey Alliance pulled the boss, Complexity had one of the Mana Storms 40% HP or so, which means 60% overall. Yeah, they're actually holding pretty steady, surprisingly enough. I would think that Necrotic would be a bigger of a gap than that. But, I mean, I digress. Let's see what the actual time difference here is here once the boss goes down. Complexity has gotten Millhouse down, just have to finish off Maleficent, and then we'll be able to see what the timestamp is here for him.
Yeah, so the boss is going down now for Complexity. Now I have to go through the short RP before they can move on. Obey Alliance still have to deal with both of the bosses, so even if Millhouse is down, they still have another 22% to go on the other boss. Complexity, though, they're already on their way back into that middle area. They still have to deal with the Hakar Wing, and that's going to be another important point for Complexity, because they are doing one of those really insane pulls where they just pull almost everything all of the trash of the Hakar wing except like 3 mobs, I believe. So everything else is going to get pulled together. It needs to be a perfect... The pull specifically is going to be important because everything needs to be gathered up onto the urn. And there's a lot of casters there that need to be properly interrupted so they actually move to that urn space and don't just stand still and cast. Because if something goes wrong with the gathering part, then that can be a huge problem for them. But first, before they go in there, they need to deal with this Tormentor and this Death Speaker pack as well.
Yep, can be a lot of problems here. Gotta remember those Inferno casts can essentially wipe your group if you let them go off here. In addition to that, those Shadow Cores are going to be pelting Scott during this entire pull while Death Speaker's still alive. Fortunately for this team, they have plenty of focused single target damage to burn both of those adds down, but surprisingly enough, all the trash is dead first. Looks like Shakib got some of those Dance of Chi-Chi procs in order to blitz the trash down. But that might be a little bit of a problem. They might not have that much focused single target damage left for these last 2 mobs. Okay, they're going to be fine. No issue. As long as that Inferno gets interrupted, they should be fine. I also like when the Death's Embrace goes on top of the Tormented mob and it just becomes massive, like covers up your entire screen, but Fired Up able to spell steal that right away. No big deal for Complexity, but again, that's not the scary pull for them, right? The scary pull is coming up right now in this car wing. The Bloodlust is available in 10 seconds. They'll be popping that almost instantly on cooldown here as they set up this massive pull in this hallway here.
Yeah, let's take a look at Complexity and see how they set this all up. First, they use that Imprison onto those Devoted ads that they don't want to pull. That ring as well to make sure they're not in combat with the right side priest that is standing there. And now they're pulling up everything else. You can see the Silence Sigil has been used at the very start to make sure they're all gathered. Then the Fear Sigil to make sure they're interrupted before the stun goes through. And now I'm Fired Up is using that urn to make sure everything is stunned, while the rest of the damage dealers are actually just trying to kill this trash before that stun is running out. You saw Fired Up was even topping the damage, even though he was the one clicking that urn. So somehow just doing the insane amount of damage while doing the utility as well.
It's kind of funny, as a Frost Mage, like 90% of your AoE damage comes from just casting Blizzard and Frozen Orb. You don't really need to do anything else. So you cast your Frozen Orb, you cast your Blizzard, and then once your Blizzard's on cooldown, you can click the Orb, and then by the time you're done clicking the urn, you can just press your Blizzard again, so you don't really lose that much damage by clicking the urn. It's actually a pretty solid class in that aspect, but one of the big things they talked about yesterday, the reason they saved their Bloodlust for this pull is because if they don't Bloodlust this pull, they start running out of tools to stay alive, and you can see as this pull kind of starts to peter out, as their damage peters out, as the Bloodlust falls down, people start dropping low from those bursting stacks. They start running out of juice to deal with it. I feel like if this pull lasted another 15 or so seconds, they would have had some issues staying alive. But again, dealing with it relatively clean. No deaths on the board for them still. Getting through it cleanly, and now they're on to Hakar.
Yeah, MDI Alliance on their side, they're not dealing with this trash in one pull. They're doing those 2 pulls that we've seen a lot of other teams do. And you can see just how much time Complexity made up by doing all of this in just one. Of course, they had to commit their Bloodlust, but as long as they don't need it for this Hakar pull, it's not actually going to be more inefficient to use it on trash, right? Usually, you do get a little bit more of a time save by using the Bloodlust on a boss compared to trash, but if it makes it possible and it saves you one whole pull, then obviously that's going to be a big deal for them. As you can see, the boss is still melting pretty fast, even though they don't have that last. Of course, JB also committed the Ash and Hallow for this one. As you can see, he's doing 10k DPS on the board as well. And then Shakib also doing a lot of damage. I guess a lot of the damage Shakib is doing is actually AoE on these Sands of Hakar, I would assume. But still, the boss just dying so quickly.
I mean, look at the gap that's opened up now because of the pull style Complexity is going for that massive hallway pull using the Bloodlust there. They have defeated Hakar before Obey Alliance has even gotten to pull the boss. Now, Obey Alliance should deal with this boss a little bit faster because they have the Bloodlust available. They haven't popped it quite yet, though. I wonder if they're going to be waiting for some cooldowns to pop up. Maybe they're waiting for the 2 minutes from the Monk to pop up before they actually hit that. But nope, hit it right away before those cooldowns come back up. There is the Bloodlust pop. The boss should go down probably about 30 seconds faster for them than we saw for Complexity, but I don't know. They're just so far behind now. I don't know. I mean, it's going to take away from Complexity for them to catch up, I think, at this point. There's not a whole lot that's going in favor of Obey Alliance. Complexity has just played this dungeon pretty much to perfection, and this is kind of the thing that we were talking about all weekend with Obey Alliance. They're definitely like up there with the top echelon of the teams in the MDI, but the strategies they employ aren't going to be enough to knock off the top teams if the top teams play their strategies cleanly. They're always going to be those 30 seconds to a minute behind.
Yeah, and another thing someone in chat just mentioned, which I believe is something that Complexity thought of as well, is obviously the necrotic dagger, the necrotic wound, actually working on Hakar on that blood shield, right? So reducing that blood shield by 3 players is actually going to be a decently valuable, and that's another reason why they don't actually have to use that bloodlust there, right? Obey Alliance not running that, having to commit that bloodlust onto the boss to kill it quicker, it does make sense in this scenario, even if it's only for one boss, because I don't think a lot of these other mobs have any sort of healing. Well, they have healing, but it can be interrupted, right? You have the High Priest and the Hoodoo Hexers, but obviously those casts are going to be interrupted, so it's going to be too valuable for that. But yeah, now you can see Complexity that are on the last boss. Lip is... not sure what Lip is doing, actually.
I think he got stuck.
It looked like... Okay, so I think what happened was that there was an enraged spirit patrolling to the platform that he needed to go to, so he was trying to use Door of Shadows to get to a platform instead of using the port, because if you use the teleport, you get to a platform in a position that you cannot control, and then he maybe would have aggroed that enraged spirit. So I guess he was trying to use Door of Shadows instead, but it didn't work out.
Are they able to res him right now? Somebody has to go to his platform and res him before they all get gripped in for the boss phase. If they don't get the res off, they're going to have to do an entire phase of Muizala with 1 DPS down. Not only that, but they're going to have to go into a second intermission. And I was going to say this is the opening that Obey Alliance would need to get back into the game, but unfortunately on the other side, they've just had a full team wipe to phase 1 of Muizala. So I actually didn't see what was happening on their side of the screen because I was watching the Complexity side.
Oh, okay, so it looks like, oh no, both rogues of both of the teams making mistakes here, as it looked like Bu was trying to shadow step and he fell off. So they decided to just all jump down and reset. Yeah, that's very unfortunate, as Complexity now has to deal with all of this trash without Lip being alive.
Oh, Scott!
They do have
Scott's
the battle
down.
rest. Scott is down too. They do have a battle rest, but I'm not sure if they can get it off. JB used that bubble to make sure that he can maybe get the rest off, and Fired Up is sitting in this ice block, but it's gonna be hard to get it off. You see JB is trying, but as he's got this immunity up, but the boss is gonna be casting an AoE in just a second if no one's gonna be in melee range here. Thankfully, he's actually casting the dodge just now, and Fired Up, I think he got it off.
He got it
as he's blinked the last second as well. Yeah,
he got it.
Scott is alive now. They still have 2 rests, so can actually get Shakib up too. There we go. Shakib is now up as well, and they should be able to finish this. Wow, that was so good that they managed to actually recover from this, because this could have been a full team wipe any second late on that rest, and they could have wiped too, and then it would have been back to the Alliance.
I mean, the amount of things that had to go right for them there in order for that to, like, not result in a wipe. The boss started casting his combo where you have to dodge left, right, and back. And during that combo, he doesn't actually do melees or search for a melee target, so you don't have to worry about that AoE going up if you can't find a melee target. So they're actually able to get the res off on the tank. You can taunt and make sure the boss doesn't do any AoEs before he phases. Man, that's a combination of luck and player's skill, knowing that you can still live through mechanics and play it absolutely perfectly. And again, this is a huge example of the best teams being able to come back from scenarios that 90% of other players would have no idea how to save themselves in. That was like a masterclass on just fixing a situation that you should not be able to recover from. And because of that, they're able to take a very sloppy game 1 over Obey Alliance.
Oh my goodness. Complexity just almost throwing the game, coming back from having only 2 players alive, and still some of the trash was like just barely alive, but they managed to still cleave it down with whatever damage they had left remaining. Let the dots finish them off, and they are going to be taking game number 1, Tettles. And, you know, just like Zyro said, you know, the best teams are able to just avoid these wipes, the most terrible and terrifying situations somehow.
Dude, I thought that once Scott died, it was over for Complexity. The ability to be able to recover there at the very last moment is something that I was not expecting to be able to happen, because whenever Scott went down, there were still warlords and cultists up, and they had 3 people just dead. It looked like it was going to be one of those things where a full team wipe was going to happen. Obey Alliance was going to be able to just by a miracle, claw it back after having their own wipe. But kudos to Complexity for being able to take map 1 there. Their time was looking very promising up until disaster struck, and then it was looking less promising. But good job to them for being able to claw it back in that way.
I'm actually watching it back live right now just to see exactly how that transpired. The block in melee from Fired Up is the one thing that stopped them from wiping. If he wasn't in melee there, the boss would have done the AoE and killed JB and Fired Up. JB was able to kite out those last few trash mobs there to keep them alive. And then once the Master of Death started casting, they were able to, Fired Up was able to come out of the block, finish the trash mobs off, and get the res off. That's just, that's insane.
Fired Up
presence
also,
of mind.
yeah, Fired Up also had the presence of mind that the boss started casting the combo, and the very first combo he did was the melee hit. So he got out of the block, and he had to immediately run away from the boss with the 50% slow on him to make sure he doesn't get hit by that. And then he walked in right afterwards to cast the rest, and then blink on the other side to not get hit by the combo. That was insane.
The Fired Up highlight reels just continue for this guy. Just absolutely nuts. Stitching this all back together and everything there. I mean, we saw JB almost go down as well once he took the frontal and everything like that from the boss. I thought he was trying to like cast door or something like that, but just didn't have enough time. But that was just absolutely nuts on their side. Settles. What do you got? What other highlights do you have for us as well?
The highlight reel, I was going to start talking about invisible time saves. So Complexity started getting off to a pretty early lead with their trash by being able to keep Varuth stacked up with all of these birds in the Ardenwild wing, and then Obey Alliance with their triple volcanic plume power were then able to keep all of their mobs stacked for prolonged periods of time and claw back the invisible time loss that they had off of the Executioner pull. Then they did this weird pull with the Enraged Spirit with all of these Bone Soldiers, which I thought was going to be the nail in the coffin for them pathing-wise. I thought that they were just going to lose based off worse pathing whenever Complexity was able to take these Bone Soldiers and all of these skeletons and pull this race car into the Arf. And this pull actually ended up saving them somewhere in the range of 20 seconds just because later, like after the fact, Obey Alliance had to wait for that dental drill patrol, which cost them, like I said, 20 seconds. And I thought that Complexity was going to win purely off of this. Of course, that was not the case. At the end, there was a throw and then a counter throw, but the counter throw wasn't really that bad relative to the initial throw, because if you saw in real time, the rogue shadow stepped Moizala and just completely fell off the ledge. Then Obey Alliance was like, all right, we're not doing this as 4-man. We're just going to jump off the ledge right now and try to salvage it, and we hope that Complexity wipes. And their hopes were looking to be prophesized, but like Zyro was talking about, Fired Up making some absolute massive moves there, getting the Warlords, the Cultists down, getting all of those reses out. JB even drops the Ashen Hollow.
I was about to
Hollow.
Yeah, I was about to ask. I'm like, how do they kill off those mobs? Because like, I didn't think that Frost's just passive damage would be enough to just finish those mobs off. But man, that Ashen difference was huge, actually. Wait, does he literally just take a melee attack? Fired Up's nuts. He just took a melee to the face and kept on rezzing on that one. What a beast. Dude, beast. I can't even begin to tell you like how many times that these teams are just so well focused, so well practiced. They just do their strategy and everything like that, and everybody does their part. You don't really see any sort of like individual just hero plays or tons of times where people are just adapting to the situation at hand. But like that right there is just nuts. It's just such a great testament to how skilled these players are. And we've talked about it as well, Zyro, how important being an excellent raider has a strong impact on being an excellent MDI competitor.
I mean, I may be a little bit biased. He is my teammate after all.
That's why I talked to you about it.
These are the kind of plays that like, people that are extremely in tune with what's going on in the game can make all the time. And it's not just the Complexity players as well. This is the traits of players like the Echo players, the Perplexed players. All of these guys can consistently make these plays to save pulls that you really feel like you should have no right to save. I mean, 2 players alive with trash alive on top of a boss. Come on. I mean, how are you supposed to get out of that scenario? But time and time again, the top end teams prove that they're good enough to kind of problem solve ways out of those really, really bad scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's a little bit unfair that we're just giving Fired Up and JB and Scott all of this credit here and Jakib when it really was all about Lip.
Lip not getting to his platform in time because he was walled off by the enraged spirit and then dying to the demise by Moizala. It was so tragic.
That's just a tragedy.
Like, what are you supposed to do?
He's probably motivating them though on voice chat, right? He was motivating them.
Got
Like,
this.
you can do it, guys. You can do it.
Maybe Lip was the big brain making the calls to save them from to tell them what to do to life.
Yeah.
You never know, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it was a team effort and it wasn't just Fired Up.
Yeah,
probably was.
Either way, that composition, that group of players, the synergy they have together, and just the smarts and the WoW know-how, just absolutely phenomenal. So huge kudos to them, because that's got to be like our biggest play of the season thus far. Game number 2, though, it's going to be on 22 Theater of Pain here in Nagura. Fort Inspiring and Grievous.
Yeah, so Complexity doesn't have the... They already have played Theater of Pain yesterday. They didn't have the best time. They had 21 minute 6 seconds time. They was beaten by Ambition. But Obey Alliance, they lost to Ambition and they had 7 deaths on the board. Actually, the full team wipe to that gas bag pull in front of Gourd Shop. So before that, though, they looked really good. Obey Alliance route through the dungeon looked really good. So I do think that if they don't have the same mistake there again, if they have a clean run, then I do think they have the possibility of beating Complexity's time, unless Complexity made some improvements on their routes, which is of course also possible. If they saw, oh, Ambition is having a faster route, maybe there's something we need to change. And they're also running that Rested Druid comp as well. I wonder if they changed it up or if they stick to that Rested Druid comp.
Well, you have to remember, of course, in the previous Theater of Pain run that Complexity had this weekend, we found out after the fact that part of the reason they added a very inefficient pull to the trash count was that their tank had to stand up and answer the door in the middle of the match. So I would hope that they could go a little bit faster if he doesn't have to do that this time. But again, it's just going to be a matter of whether or not Complexity can stay clean, right? Obey Alliance does have a good time, but again, I think most of their routes are just a little bit behind the top end teams.
Well, this is going to be the test, won't it? I mean, we didn't really get a full view of how quick that they could be because of that wipe that Obey Alliance experienced previously here in Theater. So this is always going to be that test, and it's not really the first time as well that we've described Obey Alliance this way either, Tettles. This was really the label we sort of slapped upon them last season as well. So I think they kind of know that mold. And there's always that bet that they're having as well on that consistency going to be making the difference for them.
Feels like whenever you start to count out Obey Alliance, they always reverse sweep the team that they're playing against.
Yes.
It happened yesterday too, where it's just, yes. Oh, Obey Alliance looked pretty good, but they had some problems in the first run. Oh, Obey Alliance has then just reverse sweeped Ambition. Is it going to happen 2 days in a row? Are they going to see themselves all the way through the upper bracket? I'm really interested to see if Complexity does run that Resto Druid again. I mean, you guys kind of touched on it a little bit. I feel like it's definitely a lot worse than the Holy Paladin, just in terms of like times, like how much time you can realistically save. But at the same time, it is Grievous, so the Resto Druid does provide you a lot more stability amongst the whole entire rest of your party, while providing a decent amount of damage. Like that Kyrian Resto Druid is really not that bad. But I do wonder if it was just like a first round JB meme, or if it was like, oh, this is our legitimate strategy kind of thing.
Could also just be that legitimate strategy, and like you said, it could be either way. Especially when you're coming into the bracket as like the top seed, and you're going against a lower level team, then maybe there's going to be that difference. But a number of interviews we've talked to with all these different players and teams, they always speak to how important it is to have the proper timings every single moment that they're going through the dungeons. That all the CDs are exactly where they're expecting to be. It's going to be running like clockwork. So I feel like I'd be a bit surprised if they made the pivot to the Paladin, because it started changing around how they heal and how they have damage cooldowns for some of the pulls at least. But Complexity's been known to surprise, so we'll see what's going to be happening here, as this is going to be game number 2 with Complexity up 1 versus Obey Alliance. We're getting it started right here in Theater of Pain.
All right, let's take a look if we can see that Resto Druid again. And then we're also going to have to see what Abe Alliance is going to do this time around, if they stick to their strategy and just hope they're not going to make that same mistake again with this gas bag pull that they're doing. And yeah, I think it's going to be really close. It's also a pretty long dungeon with those affixes that we have. So it's around a 20-minute dungeon, which means that the Bloodlust usage is also going to be pretty... like they have a lot of time basically to decide when they're going to Bloodlust, because they're only going to get 2 usages anyway. So we'll see when they decide on doing that as well.
Yeah, and I want to see like the routing change from, well, the weird route that they took last time around versus what their actual intended route is. They didn't actually have extra count last time, if I remember properly. They actually got exactly 100% count, so there's definitely some weird count thing that they have to make up. Maybe they would have just pulled more Shackled Souls onto Koltharok. I just want to see what the actual intended route is here from Complexity, because there were a lot of question marks last time around. And of course, they do weird things like taking the left route in the Koltharok wing first, whereas most live teams opt to go for the right route where there's just 2 mages. It's really weird. You almost never want to opt into pulling more Shackled Souls when you have the option not to.
Yeah, the Shackled Souls are... I mean, I'm definitely always really scared whenever I see those MDI pulls doing... like, those MDI teams doing that, because those Shackled Souls already are so scary when you pull them by themselves. And if you pull them on top of that boss and you get that extra damage, plus the Grievous as well, it's just so much damage in a group. But yeah, it looks like JB is sticking to that Rest Druid, that Kyrian Rest Druid that he's using to empower one of his teammates with that bond, giving them more stats, and then also empowering it once every minute. Now, other than that, their comp is the same between Complexity and the Bay Alliance. The only difference is that Rest Druid versus the Holy Paladin, and Bay Alliance is playing Horde, while Complexity is sticking to Night Elves.
Yeah, and I mean, the difference is going to be pretty noticeable on the damage meters in terms of how much actual DPS the healer himself is putting out, but you have to remember the way that JB is playing this Resto Druid is by playing Kyrian, like you mentioned, and also using that Kyrian Legendary, so he's buffing one of the members of his group every minute with a pretty massive stat buff depending on the Covenant, and that's buffing their damage even further than what we're used to seeing. If I had to guess here, I think it's going to be on the Monk, and yeah, you can actually see that second Kyrian Empowerment did go out on Shakib there, so he's going to do a little bit more damage than the Monk on Obey Alliance, but of course Monk damage is actually really variable too, right, because of those Dance of Chi-Ji procs. I think that a Kyrian empowered monk that doesn't get procs could pretty easily do less damage than a non-empowered monk that just happens to not get procs, right? And again, I mean, this is the same pull from Complexity that we saw earlier in the week. They CC that one inspired mob off in the corner, don't deal with it, I believe, until the last boss of the dungeon. I'm pretty sure they ended up killing it to finish off the count at the end of the dungeon. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about leaving that one mob off in the corner there.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, because as far as I'm aware, they do have, like, they could just play with the champion, right? But this is what all the other MDI teams do. The other MDI teams, they have that champion in the staff wing that they just leave the seat, and while there are Ps happening on Mordrefa, on the last boss, they just kill off the champion, which in my mind is the same thing as killing off this one mob that Complexity just left. Like, it really doesn't matter which one you choose. So having that inspired mob on top of the first boss is kind of free, right? I would say that's a free percentage you can gain. But that champion, that is not free, because the champion you cannot really kill with anything else. So I prefer killing the champion for the last percent over this inspired mob. But one more thing I wanted to quickly note is that the Bay Alliance actually killed that first boss quite a lot quicker, 16 seconds over Complexity, but they also only dealt with the Bloodhorn. They didn't pull the other 2 mobs into that first pack, and they also had the Ashen. So whenever Bay Alliance has that Ashen Hollow, they're definitely gonna be dealing with whatever they are dealing with at the moment quicker. But it's very likely that the Rest Druid brings more DPS and more damage to a group outside of the Ashen, so they could be making that time up on those other pulls where the Ashen Hollow is down for a Bay Alliance.
Yeah, I'm actually really interested in looking forward to see what the overall damage meters are for both teams to compare the damage that a Resto Druid brings versus the Holy Paladin, but got to keep an eye. Both teams going for this big pull with the Portal Guardian on top of Incinerator Arcaloth. Lots of damage coming out on the group here, and there's no Wings or Ashen for Obey Alliance to live through. You can see they're starting to barely start to tick down to Grievous as the pull ends. That could be a scary moment for them, but look at the complexity here. I mean, that's one of the benefits of having a Resto Druid versus a Holy Paladin. The Resto Druid really kind of, it's in its element in Mythic Plus, right? Only having to heal 5 people, they have a lot of tools to keep people topped through a lot of damage, and I didn't even see any Grievous ticks on them for that entire pull.
Yeah, definitely a lot of raw healing power coming out of the Resto Druid as well, as they're moving to the left side. This is something we've noted about them a few times already. They're not going to those 2 mages, they're going to these Shackled Souls onto the left for a little bit of extra count, so they can skip that champion later that most of the other teams are dealing with. And Obey Alliance, on the other hand, they went to the right side and they're now already in this Portal Guardian area. You can see Obey Alliance actually is a little bit quicker in like the actual position in the dungeon, but they're a little bit behind in trash. You can see complexity already up to 17% because they dealt with some of those Shackled Souls already, while Obey Alliance is only at 14%. So I would say they're really close together at the moment, those teams. Just a little bit of a different route.
Yeah, and you have to remember as well that complexity has that 3 extra % trash from pulling extra mobs, so it's the first boss at the start of the dungeon as well, so they're going to have a little bit of extra count going forward throughout the entire dungeon, as Obey Alliance is not going to be dealing with any of that, I believe. So just small differences of trash, and we're going to have to see how that ends up pairing out for the teams. I mean, one of the things that we saw from Complexity's route that I think we both really liked and agreed with was the extra count that they got in their run earlier this weekend actually allowed them to skip one of the mini-bosses in the Duelist Wing, which is a huge time save, right? We always talk about efficiency and MDI pulls. Single targeting one big mob down with nothing else with it is like the most inefficient thing you can do in terms of damage profiles in the game. And being able to skip a big mini-boss is a big, big time save if you can just get that trash count from doing AoE elsewhere. Now, Complexity going in for this big pull here, and check it out. They actually do end up pulling, I believe they pulled the 2 bow mages in the corner. Shakib was there with them. I think maybe he CC'd one and then pulled the other
all of
in.
them, yeah.
They pulled all of them in.
No,
okay,
all
so
of them,
they are killing all of them this time around. They just didn't kill them all at the same time last time. I'm actually kind of confused why they didn't do that last time, but why they decided to do it this time. In any case, worked out great for them.
Yeah, Obey Alliance actually did the same thing on their side too, and this is the reason why Obey Alliance is running a Horde. They had that Arcane Torrent because all of these Bone Mages have a shield on them. As you pull them, you can single target dispel the shields with the Hunter or a Mage, but it takes quite a long time while the Arcane Torrent from the Blood Elves just removes them all at once. So that's what Obey Alliance did. They gathered them all up, they used that Arcane Torrent, and all of the shields were gone. For Complexity, though, they didn't have that, so they had to DPS through the Bone Shield. But because they also had this higher HP mini-boss there, that has the most of HP, I think it didn't actually matter in the long run, because the pull is only over once that high HP mob dies. So the fact that the Bone Mages were up for a little while longer because they had the shield on them, I don't think it actually mattered. And Obey Alliance also having a little bit of an issue as they lost 40 on one of their pulls.
Yeah, that battle res isn't going to be available for them for another 3 or so minutes, whereas Complexity does have the luxury of holding on to that option. So it's going to be a little bit of an advantage for Obey Alliance going into Koltharak, but not by much. 10% of a boss damage gained versus 4% trash and a battle res used. I mean, I think it's pretty neck and neck.
Yeah, definitely incredibly close, as both of them are going to be pulling some Shackled Souls on top of Koltharak now. You can see JB walking into the corner, using some of his like Moonfires and Sunfires to get some of these Shackled Souls up. Lightbug having to use Bubble there actually. I think it was on the pull before that he had to use it. And now we can also see the Ashen timer as well. In 37 seconds he's going to get the Ashen back up for that Holy Paladin. Probably going to be saving it for the next pull, which is going to be pretty dangerous as well. Once they go into the Gore Chop Wing, there's going to be a pretty significant pull that you do at the very start of it. So that's where they're going to be committing that Ashen. Complexity, we'll see how they deal with that one, because of course they don't have that big Ashen Hollow cooldown from the healer, so they're just going to have to deal with that pull either differently, or they just do it without having that extra cooldown.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, they're holding on to that advantage ever so slightly. But man, I wonder if, I mean, this is just speculation, but I wonder if JB might be baiting himself a little bit here. Might be on that Druid Copian a little bit too much here, because in every scenario we've seen this dungeon so far, the boss damage has just been ever so slightly better from Obey Alliance, and that's not too surprising considering Ashen Hollow is just such a big damage increase every time you go for a big pull or a boss pull, right? I mean, I guess it's really hard to quantify or compare a 1 minute cooldown that buffs maybe every other pull versus a 4 minute cooldown that pretty much makes or breaks a pull. And that's why I'm so interested to see what the overall damage meter is going to be like at the end of the dungeon, because I want to see what the comparison for overall DPS across the group is. That's the only real way I can think of getting a good comparison.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting as we see a huge pull now coming in for a Bay Alliance. We saw 40 just camouflaging past the trash here, using that freezing trap to see that inspired mob on the bridge and getting in that second butcher or even third butcher. This is a pretty insane pull. So if that drop's incredibly low on that Windwalker, needs to be dispelled off of that 20% damage reduction that he's got on him, and now they need to make sure they interrupt all of those slash spewers. And that meat shield as well that is going through in that horror. But yeah, that was really clean. Complexity though having some issues as Fire Up actually goes down. Shakib as well. I do think there's some cast that went off. You can see 2 debuffs on Lip. They both released and they're going to be running back in just a second. But this might be difficult for them to finish off, as maybe some of them already used their cooldowns before they went down. No, they didn't.
It looks
actually,
like Shakib has the Tiger as well as a stack of Shadow. Oh, but I mean, we talked too soon. Another 2 casts of Withering Discharge go off, kill off the rest of the group, and that is going to be an entire team wipe, plus the 2 deaths they had earlier on the pull going out. Man, that's about as bad as it gets. And that's the opening that Obey Alliance needs. They were already ahead, but now the gap is just going to widen even further.
Yeah, I'm not sure what exactly happened there. I think it might have been the inspired mob, the Secede broke or something like that, because I saw the inspired mob was inside that big pack that they were kiting around. I'm not sure if that happened before Shakib and Fired Up went down or afterwards, but definitely some issues. And of course, when you have that inspired mob in this pack and things fall apart, then it's impossible to interrupt any of those large spirit casts and it's just gonna fall apart. So very unfortunate for Complexity. But Obey Alliance, look at them. They actually managed to do this pull now that they wiped to yesterday. This is the pull where they commit their Bloodlust to. This is where they have the gas pack and a bunch of other trash mobs with huge amounts of AoE damage incoming on the group. Lagback not having that Ashen Hollow available because he committed it on the previous pull, and also having Grievous. So this was the one situation where they actually had wiped yesterday, but this time they cleaned it up, they did it perfectly, and now they're onto Gourd Chop.
Yeah, and I mean, the gap is huge now. I mean, Complexity is 2 entire pulls behind now. They still have to deal with the rest of this pull that they've just got, that last Sludge Spewer, plus the big pull downstairs with the frontal Backle Man. And only then do they get to engage with Gourd Chop, but Obey Alliance is probably going to have Gourd Chop near or probably close to dead by the time they even get there. So yeah, Complexity in dire straits right now. They're going to need some major mistakes out of Obey Alliance in order to have any chance of taking this dungeon. Otherwise, I think we're pretty locked in for Game 3 if Obey Alliance can keep it clean.
Yeah, definitely looking good for them as they're about to finish up Gourd Chop. Complexity getting into this next pull right before the Gourd Chop area. I'm not sure if they want to skip this area. Actually, I think they skip this trash pack in front of them and then they do the trash pack afterwards with the boss, if I remember correctly. They do have their last available as well if they want to be committing it here. And looks like looks like they're seeing the inspired mob and then pulling everything else. And I do believe they're gonna just be de-aggroing that single mob they left there with Shadow Melts. Yeah, some of the Shadow Melts have already been used. You can see from JB and Scott. So they already de-aggroed whoever was incumbent with it. And yeah, this is a difficult pull. Look at Complexity as well. This is that pull that Obey Alliance committed their Bloodlust to. And Complexity is not. Complexity manages to get this done without Lust, even though the Gaspack is still casting 1 frontal and Beckle there, but did manage to survive. But yeah, this is scary. Rest of it definitely pretty powerful though in those AoE damage situations.
Yeah, I mean, buffing your Windwalker Monk when he's blasting AoE is definitely a great trait to have, but again, it's hard to know whether or not it's actually a very good damage increase over the Ashen Hall from the Paladin. You can see JB there redid his Kindred Spirits, put it on the Rogue for the pure single target damage, going to be giving him a crit buff, I believe, for this boss as a Vinthier player. So, yep, Rogue's going to be getting a nice little single target damage boost, but they are just so far behind. Gorechop was dead for Obey Alliance before Complexity even got to engage the boss. So, yeah, they're just an entire boss behind in the highest level dungeon that we have available in the MDI on 22. These bosses are going to take about 1.5 to 2 minutes to kill each. So, yeah, that's the deficit they're looking at right now, in addition to the extra death timers from having 5 extra deaths on the board. That's another 25 seconds as well. Bay Alliance dropping a little bit scarily low there, but going to be able to be topped up by Lagbug. Not going to be any major issues for them there.
Yeah, Bjorn unfortunately went down there as he immediately did release, so they didn't have to use a battle rest for him. But yeah, definitely some issues there. Another 5 seconds extra on the board, but they're still ahead in that time penalty as well. So it's 25 seconds in Obey Alliance's favor because of those 5 additional deaths that Complexity has. They are dealing with some of the mini bosses in that Xev area. Definitely gonna be avoiding Sogadon. You can see him stand in the corner to the left side of this room, of this arena. And unless they're going to be pulling it accidentally during Xev, they're not going to be dealing with this one at all. You can also see Sortha on that Windwalker activating the banner in the corner, making sure they get that versatility buff while they're dealing with this next mini-boss. And it looks like they're also going with the Arbalists here, so definitely a scary pull. Lots of bleed effects coming out in the group.
Yeah, lots of damage going on in the group, but they do have the wings available. You can see the Ashen is down on the ground, so that should be able to help soak up any of that extra group damage that goes out just by passively healing everyone. And of course, that also allows Lagbug to go ahead and just blast Haruja here to help deal with that mini-boss as quickly as possible. So, not going to be any major issues. Once those Arbalists are down, most of the danger of this pull is gone. They shouldn't be getting any random one-shots from, like, double corals from the Arbalists. So, well played on the side of Obey Alliance here. Complexity has gotten through Gorechop. They're now on to the first mini-boss in this section of the dungeon. And one of the things you have to remember is that if we remember properly and they played it the same way, they do have the advantage of being able to skip one of the mini-bosses in this section of the dungeon, but I'm not really sure that advantage is going to be enough to let them get back at the dungeon. They're just still so far behind right now. They're an entire mini-boss behind, even with the skip.
Yeah, definitely all on Obey Alliance now to see if they can do the rest of this dungeon cleanly. Not too much percent. Oh, Scott actually going down as they're dealing with this mini-boss and the inspired mobs. They did manage to get the battle rest up because they do have the Rest Druid, of course, that can just cast that without needing the engineering rest, so they should be able to recover. But yeah, Obey Alliance, I mean, they're already onto Xav now. You can see they're 93% trash on their board, so they still have those 3 trash mobs that they left upstairs. And they have this captain here. So I do believe what their plan is that they're going to deal with Xav. And once Xav is done, they're going to deal with the champion while somebody in their group is going upstairs to trigger that RP event for Mordretha. And then they're also going to be dealing with those trash mobs upstairs that they left. And that's going to be the last percent they need to get 100%. And I mean, look at the time. Obey Alliance, incredibly clean run and really fast. I really like their route, though, to be honest. I think the fastest route we've seen so far was by Ambition, right? Ambition won against Obey Alliance, but Obey Alliance had that full team wipe there. So seeing a little bit of a cleaner run for Obey Alliance, we'll be interested to see what kind of time they end up having at the end.
Fired up, not immune to being a hunter when he's on that class, just instantly dying to random Arbalest damage on this pull that they're going for here that Obey Alliance managed to pull off cleanly. Unfortunately, that's just kind of one of the traits of being a hunter sometimes. Sometimes you just die to random damage. It's not their fault, that's the way the class is built. Once those Arbalists... Wait, that's interesting. They killed the Arbalists last? Do you think that's on purpose? I feel like you almost always want to focus down the Arbalists, right?
Yeah, I think this is another... okay, so Obey Alliance did the same pull up, right? And they used that Ashen. And the Arbalists just exploded. Like, they just died so fast. And I think this is like another... This is another advantage of the Ashen, in my opinion. Not just because Ashen is just overall a lot of damage in the overall, like, damage meter at the end. That's not really what matters. It's the Ashen burst kind of allows you to do pulls that would be incredibly scary otherwise, because you have so much extra burst that it kind of diminishes the amount of casts the mobs are doing. You have to interrupt less, you have to deal with less stuff, and that's exactly why we saw Fired Up maybe going down here as well, because the Arbalists were alive for so long. There's so many bleed effects that went out in the group, and it's just so much extra healing that JB has to do, which is just something that happens passively when you have the Ashen down, right? You have the Ashen down, you're DPSing the mobs, and your group just passively kind of gets healed as you have this huge cooldown down. So those kind of really risky pulls with lots of incoming damage really gets so much easier when you have that cooldown available from the Paladin. But thankfully, Complexity did manage to get it done after having the one issue with Fired Up going down there.
And here we go. The last boss is being sized up, and Obey Alliance is getting ready to finish off this dungeon. The last 5% they need is right in front of them with the trash that they have pulled. They're taking it on top of Mordretha right now. No Bloodlust is available, but every cooldown in the book is down. The Ashen Hollow Wings are down. The True Shot is down. Everything is going down quickly. And check out this spin to win damage. Just now passing up the Hunter Burst on those ads. And that trash is going to be dead before the boss does any meaningful mechanics. I think Obey Alliance is absolutely crushing it right now. And just to add insult to injury, Complexity, like you mentioned, it looks like they have pulled Sagadon. I mean, if they did pull Sagadon, I'm pretty sure they don't
reset
be dead.
it now.
Maybe they
had
could
the
have
debuff.
reset it. You're right. They did.
Maybe someone feigned death or something.
Yeah, maybe Feign or maybe Shadow Meld. That should be an instant death scenario. But we're not interested in what Complexity has to offer right now. As Obey Alliance has Mordretha down below 50% right now. And they are looking to take this series to a Game 3. And, I mean, looking forward to Game 3, Nagura. We have Halls of Atonement as our Game 3, which is going to be a very quick, very dangerous dungeon where you pretty much have to go all out. And you have to remember the consequences of this series. The winner of this series instantly qualifies for the Global Finals. They get this big pressure taken off their shoulders. They get to make it through. But if you lose, you go down to the lower bracket. You have to fight your way back into even qualifying for the Global Finals, let alone trying to win this bracket.
Yeah, and this Halls, Obey Alliance actually is the fastest time of Group B in Halls. So they're actually really good there, and Complexity we haven't seen there just yet. So Obey Alliance finishing off the boss right here, and they're going to be the ones evening out that series. Complexity Obey Alliance 1-1. This is so close. Wow, well done, Obey Alliance.
Oh, we're going to be going to a game number 3. Obey Alliance taking that victory here in theater there, Tettles. And man, we had some good expectations for Obey Alliance going into it. We had brought up the point about how they had their wipe, because we didn't quite see what their best run would be in theater. And right now, they capitalize on that Complexity wipe, all those extra deaths they were racking up. And man, Obey Alliance is going to tie up the series.
I really like Obey Alliance's route just as a whole, and I swear Obey Alliance has some reverse sweep voodoo going on where they always they have something go wrong in the first map, and then they come back even stronger for the subsequent two. And that Halls of Atonement they had, it was the fastest that we've seen across the whole entire weekend, like Nagura has pointed out. They had probably a 45-second time loss to Sanguine in that dungeon, but
that's right.
I think that 45-second loss to Sanguine cannot happen to other teams. It cannot happen to either Complexity or Obey Alliance, and we need to see them both be super consistent, have very minimal deaths, because honestly, this whole entire series so far has been kind of a bloodbath, and I think if any team can have a deathless run in Halls of Atonement, they'll probably end up taking that map.
Yeah, and one of the things we were talking about going into this dungeon was we weren't sure whether or not the Obey Alliance time here could compete with Ambition, but if you want to take a look at the timer there, it was 2049 for Obey Alliance. The dungeon where Ambition beat Obey Alliance was at 2043, so, I mean, maybe... Wow. I mean, you guys have been saying it the whole time.
Deaths, right?
Maybe I'm not giving them enough credit. Maybe they are, like, up there with the top-end teams. Maybe I've been underselling them a little bit.
Yeah, you have been, Zyro. It's okay, though.
I think you have. I agree.
Oh, Tettles, let's zoom in. Let's talk about some of those wipes that Complexity had, those deaths.
Yeah, so at the very beginning, I thought that Complexity did something super neat in this dungeon where they were, after they killed the first boss, they had that one mob CC'd off to the side, that contender, then they all vanished or melded it off to be able to drop combat with it. And then by being Alliance, then they don't have any purges for these bone mages, so this pack actually just ends up taking twice as long as it probably should. They are able to get it down, and it didn't cause any issues, but whenever you compare it to that of Obey Alliance, they insta-belf off all of the shields, and you see these mages just get absolutely blown up on top of this Bone Reaver, making this pack look just infinitely easier from the side of Obey Alliance. And Obey Alliance, I felt like they were slightly in the lead coming out of the Koltha Rock Wing. Obviously, there was a bit of a trash count disparity. You have to factor in like 4% enemy forces. But this is where it all went wrong for Complexity. Then you had to stop comparing the routes from after Complexity having a full team wipe to that pull into the Gore Chop Wing, and Obey Alliance being able to retool, recover, and like get this Bloodlust pull that they had so many issues on yesterday and do it just perfectly. Once that it was done well, Obey Alliance really felt like they were just in a commanding lead. They were able to just do this absolutely insane pull with all the Arbalists and this mini-boss. I thought that this pull was incredibly dangerous, but just this shows the power of Ashen Hollow right here. Being able to just get all of these mobs dealt with, while at the same time Lagbug is keeping his team topped off. Absolutely great stuff. And then another absolutely like outstanding Ashen Hollow pull on Mordretha. Whenever you have all of these contenders, you have both the contenders and the Ritualist. Skylark can be taking a lot of damage, but that also shows the power of the Prot Warrior, because Prot Warriors are virtually immune to physical damage. We keep harping on that, and even in his 22 setting, he could just face tank every single thing right there whenever they're all just pounding him.
Yeah, no question there, and very well played by Obey Alliance to make sure that series is getting tied up. And when we were talking about this matchup before we got started, Nagura, we were talking about how, we've seen an excellent run in Halls of Atonement for Obey Alliance, fastest of all the groups, but we haven't seen it just yet on the side of Complexities. We don't really know what they have in store yet.
Yeah, and I wonder what they're gonna bring in that dungeon as well, because we saw Obey Alliance actually have a very interesting composition that they were running too, right? They had the Vengeance Demon Hunter, the Paladin, the Fire Mage, and the Unholy DK with a Shadow Priest. So first time seeing a DK in a while, which was very common in last season, right? An Unholy DK was almost always part of Halls of Atonement composition, but they kind of shied away from that DK, except Obey Alliance. They said, you know what, I don't understand why you guys are not running Unholy DK. It's so good in Halls, and they really showed how good it is. If only they wouldn't have had those unfortunate Sanguine heals, then the time would have been even quicker. So if Obey Alliance can clean up that Sanguine, the Sanguine mistakes they had last time, then it's really going to be a super quick time. And I wonder if Complexity has some special pick for this dungeon as well, because Halls of Atonement is really, especially in a sense that you can do so many insanely huge pulls, and on top of that, you can also do a lot of pulls where you pull trash on top of a boss, which kind of makes it possible to get an advantage from a composition like a Warlock composition, where we've seen Affliction Warlocks in this dungeon, and we've seen Dastro Warlocks in this dungeon as well. So even Elemental Shamans, we really have seen lots of different compositions for Halls, and the teams aren't really sure which one is really the best for this dungeon.
Yeah, and when we've been looking at some of those different group compositions, you're right, we have been seeing those Warlocks, but we've also seen it from players who've naturally played those things before, right? We've seen a number of times in the MDI where players who haven't played Windwalker before or don't play Windwalker on live servers, they swap in, they slot into it, and they start rolling, right? But Zyro, if Complexity was going to run a Warlock, who would it be on their team?
It'd be Lip. I mean, Lip plays Warlock on live all the time.
Oh, does he? Okay.
The question is whether or not they can have Shakib fit into the role of playing something like a rogue. And I think that's probably something he's used to playing as well. He's played rogue in past MDIs. Yeah. I think the big question mark coming into this dungeon is that, I mean, obviously we saw Obey Alliance's run and we were impressed with it before, but we don't really have any comparison to make it to, right? We haven't seen a Halls of Atonement run this weekend from either Complexity or Ambition, so we don't really know, like, if Obey Alliance's Halls is fast enough. I mean, you got to remember, in the halls we saw from Obey Alliance earlier, they did have that like 20-30% Sanguine healing on the third boss of the dungeon. So I don't think we really have any good comparison to go off of here, like, at all. Like, this is we're going into this pretty much blind.
I do agree, but one thing I want to note as well is that Halls of Atonement has not been in Complexities like series before. So if you look at the path that they were taking through the bracket, then they never had to actually play Halls, and it's the third match in this upper final. And in a grand final we also have Halls, but they could theoretically use a map ban for it. So I guess there would be a possibility where they're saying, you know what, we're going to win this upper final 2-0. We're not even going to practice halls or not going to look into it too much. And we're just going to ban it in the last, in the grand final. So we don't have to deal with this at all. I don't think that's the case for Complexity, because usually they're a team that really do prepare for everything. But I'm just saying that it might be possible that they didn't put too much time in it.
I'm interested to see how well this... Yeah, I'm also interested to see how well Obey Alliance's Unholy DK does, because that was something that we saw a lot last season, and we haven't seen Unholy really brought out very much this season. 40 ends up playing more melee specs than anything else, and the Unholy DK seems more like a comfort pick for Obey Alliance, but it does have a lot of really good value in the Halls of Atonement, just with like the grips, being able to move those Sanguine mobs. We talked about it whenever the Halls was going on. And I wonder if that's going to be potentially more advantageous than something like a Warlock if Complexity was electing to play that.
It's entirely possible. And, you know, to your point, Nagura, honestly, if it was any other team, I might have agreed. But Complexity has had such a crazy history of just... I don't know if I would even say bad luck, but they've gotten knocked into the lower bracket. They've gone and had their struggles and everything like that. And I think that they are going to be extremely well prepared for this one. This is going to be our decider to see who qualifies for Globals, who is going to be sitting at the top of our bracket. Complexity and Obey Alliance are tied 1-1 as they're going to seal this series here in Halls of Atonement.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely looked like they did practice it. As we can see, they already are bringing that double mage composition here with that Frost Mage and the Fire Mage. And they're starting off with an insane pull here to the left side with those 2 shards. Bloodlust being popped as well to make sure they can deal with all of that incoming damage here. And JB going back onto that Holy Paladin, dropping the Ashen Hollow as well. Obey Alliance, though, going in a little bit of a different route, just doing a pull here in the middle area. And you can see that was actually quite a lot of a bigger pull for Obey Alliance. Look at the percentages. Obey Alliance dropping that Bloodlust, and look at that. The percent coming out of this pull, 25% for their first pull. Well, I guess once Complexity finishes off that shard, they're gonna be close to that percent as well. But did this shard heal a little bit on Sanguine, or it's actually taking them quite a long time to finish this off?
I don't think the shard is healed so much. You have to remember it's a double shard pull, so they focused one of the shards down, and then they have to deal with a second shard after the fact, and they do help augment their single target damage a little bit for the Frost Mage by bringing in those extra groundskeepers. What did heal were a couple of the collectors and obliterators after the fact that were kind of slowly being kited around, and that's kind of one of the problems of having a Frost Mage in your group for these kinds of pulls. If you just slow a mob in Sanguine, it's going to take it more time to get out of the Sanguine, so that can be an issue. Got to keep an eye on them actually using their grip sigils and the ring of pieces to make sure they get stuff out of Sanguine and not using it just willy-nilly. Unfortunately, JB there did die at the end of that pull. Didn't see what it was to. I definitely saw his character frame say dead. I didn't see what he died to, though, so that was a little bit weird. The death counter is on the board now. But yeah, you're right. That percentage for the first trash pull was smaller for Complexity, even though they went for a double shard pull. And more problems for Complexity is Shakib goes down on the Windwalker Monk. He didn't pop any cooldowns, so it's not too big of a deal, but they do have to end up using the Battle Res here, because you have to remember they did... Actually, no, they didn't Battle Res. They did pull the first 2 mobs in the dungeon, so he's able to run back, but that's just more time lost. That's an extra 5 seconds on the board. They didn't have any of his damage for the first proc. He wasn't generating those Dance of Chi procs, and that's just more problems for them here.
Yeah, lots of problems coming in for Complexity. These pulls are really difficult on the melee players, just because there's so many Dark Spears who cast that frontal, and especially if you use some sort of utility to get, like Ring of Peace, to get them out of Sanguine, or if the tank starts kiting, then all of a sudden these frontals are in all different kinds of directions, and it's really hard to even like pay attention to it at all and realize where they're going. So maybe that is what happened to Shakib here as he went down. Unfortunately, they are trying to kite out this pack, but it's really hard to get them to run out of these Sanguine pulls, especially because there's quite a few casters as well that just continuously stand still and start casting. Obey Alliance, on the other hand, they also did this lower pull now that we saw Complexity do before. So they pulled those shards with some of these Obliterators and Dark Spears, and it looked like they are doing a good job, but also had to start kiting eventually to make sure that Skylark doesn't go down with all of those necrotic stacks.
Huh. That was a little bit of a weird scenario there. They used the prison to prison a Gargan? and then they had to wait for the patrol to go by. That was really unfortunate timing. But got to keep an eye on this pull here. This is a very large pull, and that Stoneborn isn't controlled just yet, so they don't have the damage reduction. Hopefully they can get that off before they actually get the thrash damage, and I believe they did. They have that damage reduction. They should be totally fine here, but all of that trash is just now funneling in. I mean, this looks like it's a lot cleaner of a pull, but of course, the danger of this dungeon is not the actual damage the trash is doing. Remember, we're in a 19 fortified lowest level we have available in the MDI. The danger from this dungeon is going to come with those affixes, and you can see the sanguine management for complexity in this dungeon has not been great. That Houndmaster healed to full from standing in sanguine. They didn't have a knockback or a grip sigil or anything to get it out of, and I think that's actually kind of one of the things that the Unholy DK brings in this dungeon on sanguine. You can actually grip things out of sanguine like the Houndsmaster, which will like just stand there and shoot sometimes.
Yeah, definitely I've been seeing some grips on the Bay Alliance side that really helped them out with that sanguine, and also a lot of really great kiting from Skylark, making sure he not only does he run around, but he also runs line of sight, making sure the mobs follow him around, even though they would be casting if he's still in range, right? But if you go line of sight, they cannot be casting on their aggro target, and therefore they follow him, making sure they do move anyway. So really well done by Skylark there, as they're now going back in to deal with Arkaleth. But Complexity pulled Arkaleth quite a lot earlier in this pull, actually. Obey Alliance was kiting the mobs for quite a long time until they moved back in to get Arkaleth engaged. So that means Complexity saved or caught up quite a bit on time just because they pulled it earlier, and now they're already done with it.
They are ahead in terms of dungeon progression here, but the question is whether or not they're actually ahead, because you have to remember, Obey Alliance does have a little bit of extra trash on the board, so Complexity is going to have to make up that extra trash somewhere, be it a bigger pull into a boss, making it more dangerous or whatnot. But here we go, into Halkias here. The Ashen Wings are available. As you can see, we actually have an Ashen Tracker now underneath the Holy Paladin frame now. Ashen Hollow down, Wings coming out. Gonna do his best to keep the group alive. Should keep taking a lot of damage there. Looks like they are now back to an equilibrium here, and they can just go ahead and AoE everything down. The important thing here is to make sure that no sanguine is dropped directly underneath the boss. You can see Scott doing his best to just kite out this pull as much as possible. And as long as the boss doesn't start casting in that last sanguine pull, they should be home free here. And yes, Halkias is out of any of the sanguine here. The only trash mob they have left to deal with it is that one Houndmaster off in the corner. Two of them, actually.
Yeah, and Obey Alliance doing the same thing as they're getting up their trash pull on top of Halkias, also dropping that Ashen and dropping those wings. Let's see if they can also do that same great job as Scott did and make sure that Halkias doesn't get any of those sanguine heals off on him, because that would, of course, would be a disaster. You can see he was kind of close there as the boss just started casting his slam before he moved out, but it looks like they got no heals off on Halkias either. So really good job by both of those teams, making sure they're dealing with all of that trash, and on top of that also not getting any of those sanguine heals off. Complexity even pulling more trash now as they got those groundskeepers in, and also dealing with those Houndmasters. Thankfully, the boss goes down before the groundskeepers go down, because they also drop sanguine pulls as well, as you can see.
Yeah, and that was the extra percentage that Complexity needed there. That extra 4-pack of groundskeepers is exactly what they needed to get through. And now they've secured themselves an advantage. You know, that sanguine management early on was not the greatest, but because of the pull pattern they used, they've actually catapulted themselves ahead. Obey Alliance also actually end up pulling that groundskeeper pack as well for the extra trash count they need. So I wonder, it looks like Obey Alliance just went for a smaller trash pull onto the boss, going for a little bit extra safety to make sure they didn't get any sanguine healing, but that ends up putting them a little bit behind Complexity now.
Yeah, Complexity is now dealing with Echelon here as well, and there's obviously no trash you can pull on top of this boss, so it's just a plain old single target, and of course also those stone fiends that you have to deal with. And it is 1945, so it really should not be a problem for them. The only thing that could be an issue a little bit is that necrotic affix that is stacking up on the tank, but should not be an issue for Scott either. Of course, as just as I said that, he got hit by that leap of the boss. But I'm pretty certain that he just didn't get a dispel there, right? Because they have both of the mages that could be dispelling that curse, but very likely they're just dispelling themselves because they just want to continue to do DPS, right? So they're not going to be dispelling a tank. He should just be getting hit by that bleed. As Obey Alliance just now manages to reach the boss, But yeah, quite a bit behind. Not even the 10 seconds death penalty advantage that they have in their favor. That's not going to be making up for the time that they're behind on the boss here.
Yeah, and I don't foresee any major differences in damage profiles coming out on Echelon here. There shouldn't be any major gap closers or like time made up here. I mean, Obey Alliance is bursting through the first half of this boss very quickly to catch up to complexity, and it might end up being a lot closer than we assume. But I think the entire dungeon and who takes this series and qualifies for the global finals is going to come down to the next poll. This is where Obey Alliance had problems earlier this weekend, pulling 2 trash packs on top of the third boss of this dungeon. Not only is it dangerous for your tank just in terms of damage going out on him and the group, but also the fact that you also have to make sure no sanguine is going out, the boss doesn't full heal from being in a sanguine pool. That is incredibly important, and it's really going to be the make or break for the dungeon here. In complexity, opting to completely skip Execution of Aruth, we're getting right into it. You can see the Ashen Wings is up in 10 seconds for them, and that's going to be the way they get through this poll.
It even had a little bit of a safety play here as I'm fired up, pulled Maruth to the side and then used the Shadow Melt and Alter Time and Ice Block actually to de-aggro that mob so they don't accidentally aggro it as they walk through. But now you can see that there's so many trash mobs here on top of this boss. You can see all of those defensive cooldowns being popped as well as the Ashen and the Wings from JB and all of the defensive that Scott has available to him to make sure he can survive all of those necrotic stacks plus the damage coming out of the trash and the boss. Lots of AoE interrupts coming in as well with that AoE stun from Shakib and the AoE silence sigil from Scott as well. And now he starts kiting all of those mobs out of those sanguine pools. Really well done. As far as I saw, there was no heal coming up on the boss as well. So well done.
Yeah, absolutely. Not a single tick of sanguine healing going out for complexity there. Exactly how you want to see it done, and that has secured them a 30% or so advantage on the boss here after the cooldowns will run out for Obey Alliance here. But we have to keep an eye on Obey Alliance near here. I mean, in order to have a chance of coming back in this last section of the dungeon, they need to pull off this sanguine management completely perfectly, and they don't have the tools that complexity used in order to keep the mobs away. You can see they use that Ring of Peace to get the mobs away, to provide their tank a little bit of extra room to kite out. But Skylark doing a fantastic job of making sure not a single tick of sanguine healing goes on High Adjudicator Elise here. But you can see how much more difficult it was for them to even come close to pulling that off. And that Gargan is going to die right underneath Elise. It looks like they might... Oh man, that was... They were literally fractions of a second of getting a sanguine healing on the tick on the boss. But they are just so far behind now. All of the extra kiting they had to do there with not having a monk in the group just cost them a lot of time, and complexity has downed Adjudicator Elise while Obey Alliance still has 40% of the boss.
Yeah, and Complexity even saved one of those Stoneborns. You can see JB just now mind controlled it to make sure they have that extra damage onto the mini boss here on Inquisitor Cigar, because they do want to make sure they kill that boss before the second Dark Communion cast goes through. Otherwise, he's going to heal to full HP, because of course they are ignoring these neutral mobs and just completely single targeting the mini boss. They're just dragging it into the neutral mobs to get that extra single target damage from the Frost Mage specifically, and now they're popping less because they actually they're not making it.
They didn't get it. Oh, they got the touch of death.
They got it.
Wow.
That was actually so close. Shakib's touch of death just now got through, and without that bloodlust, maybe they wouldn't have made it. So that bloodlust call was so good. Whoever just pressed that button to make sure they get a little bit of extra damage in, that was incredibly close. I think a millisecond later on that touch of death, and they wouldn't have gotten it. So really well done by Complexity to save that that dungeon, because otherwise they might have lost even if Cigar would have gotten that heal off. Because if he would have gotten a heal off, then they actually would have needed to kill those neutral mobs, because then they would have been out of offensive cooldowns, right? So that was an incredibly good call, as they're now dealing with Lord Chamberlain.
I mean, they would be behind Obey Alliance, right? Obey Alliance would be ahead of them, and Complexity would still be dealing with Inquisitor Cigar right now if they didn't get that touch of death off. So huge heads-up call. I mean, we can't highlight how ridiculous of a call that was at the last second. I mean, the Dark Communion had started channeling. If it got one tick off, that's all she wrote. It's over for them. They had lost this dungeon. But because they were able to get that off, they have themselves a 50% boss health advantage here. Obey Alliance does have the Bloodlust available, but they don't have all of the damage cooldowns available, right? The Ashen Wings isn't up for them. It's actually going to be up sooner for Complexity than it is for Obey Alliance. So all eyes are on Complexity right now, with the Lord Chamberlain dropping below 30% HP, and it looks like they're going to be punching their ticket to the Global Finals.
Keep in mind, this boss also has that 50% physical damage increase plus 50% healing reduction and a 50% slow, because they only dealt with one single Tormentor, but they already healed through those intermission phases just fine, and now they only have to finish off Lord Chamberlain, so as long as they don't get hit by any of those statues that are being thrown around, then they should be okay. The 10 seconds on the board, it's just not going to be enough for Obey Alliance, very likely, even though they do have that Bloodlust running. You can see the boss is going to go down in just a second for Complexity, and then there's going to be those 10 seconds on the board that the Obey Alliance has to catch up, but it's just going to be not enough for Obey Alliance, as Complexity is going to be that team that makes it into the Global Finals, and what a series this was. Wow, so close between Complexity and Obey Alliance. Well done, both teams.
Absolutely nuts. Complexity with the 14-20 Halls of Atonement run. This is the only time that they've played the dungeon in the groups. It would be the only time that they would be playing it